My name is Lena Moore, and that dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Dad's birthday. 70 years of a life well lived, or at least, well concealed behind the smiles we gave the outside world. Our family, all around one table. It felt rare, almost fragile, to have everyone together at once. Maybe we all knew, deep down, that something could shatter at any moment. The table was beautiful. Mom had always been particular about these things. Flowers perfectly arranged, candles flickering just so, plates gleaming in the soft yellow light, the clink of glasses, the hum of quiet conversations. For a moment, I let myself believe we were okay, happy, even normal. I glanced over at my sister, Alyssa. She looked radiant, laughing, the perfect picture of charm. Alyssa had always been the bright star in our family's sky, the center around whom the rest of us orbited. At least, that's how our parents had always treated her. She caught my eye, smiled politely, and looked away quickly, as if I wasn't worth more than a fleeting acknowledgement. Nothing unusual there. Across from her sat my father, basking in the attention. He loved these moments, these pauses in time where we all pretended our family wasn't cracked beneath the polished surface. And Mom, beside him, smiling quietly, her presence softer, subdued ever since the stroke 6 months ago. She didn't speak much anymore, but her eyes still held words. They watched me closely, comfortingly. I knew that look well, reassurance, perhaps even apology, hidden behind silence. I sipped my wine slowly, my heart gradually calming into the rhythm of the evening. The laughter around me became background music to my thoughts. But then Dad tapped his glass gently with his fork, drawing everyone's attention. The small noise echoed louder than it should have. All eyes turned toward him. "We have an announcement," he said, clearing his throat. Beside him, Mom's polite smile stiffened just slightly. My pulse quickened. Something didn't feel right. I glanced again at Alyssa. She sat comfortably, smugly even. She already knew. She always did. Dad's voice was steady, oddly detached, as if he were reading a business memo, not speaking to his daughters. "We've decided it's time to update our will." The words hit me softly at first, almost like a feather falling against my cheek, gentle yet disturbing. The air around the table thickened, expectancy pulling at our collective breath. Then his eyes settled firmly on mine. "Everything's going to Alyssa." Lena's not in it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was louder than any sound I'd ever heard. Forks stopped mid-motion. Eyes darted around, confused, uncomfortable. My aunt's mouth dropped slightly open, her gaze sympathetic yet distant. Uncle Mark fidgeted, embarrassed for me but unwilling to say anything. But me? I felt cold, humiliated, betrayed. It wasn't about money. It was about how casually, cruelly, they had announced it. No explanation, no warning, just years of quiet punishments finally given voice. And the announcement made in public at dinner, as though I were nothing. A forgotten daughter. A mistake to erase. My fingers trembled around the stem of my glass. Anger rose slowly, but it was deeper than anger. It was sadness, sharp and old. A sadness I had known since childhood, hidden behind my quiet resilience. It had become a part of me, silent as a heartbeat, buried beneath polite smiles and dutiful nods. Alyssa's eyes glinted with something like victory. She'd always seen me as competition. The quiet, careful child who never cried, never complained. The one who built a successful life through sheer persistence, never asking for praise, never expecting fairness. Perhaps she thought she'd finally won some invisible war. I looked at my mother, searching her face. Her eyes were glistening now, softening with something like sorrow. Did she know about this? Had she agreed? She looked away, down at her plate. A tiny betrayal in itself. I wanted to say something brave or witty or biting, to stand up and challenge them, demand an explanation. But words froze in my throat, choking me. Shame burned my cheeks, not because I believed I deserved nothing, but because they believed it, and that's when something deeper stirred within me. A quiet resistance, a whispered reminder of something hidden away, something I'd nearly forgotten about. The envelope. Mom had given it to me, quietly, privately, months ago, before the stroke. She'd pressed it into my palm with trembling fingers. Her voice gentle but insistent, just in case, she had said. If things ever feel off, at the time, I hadn't understood fully. It seemed cryptic, unnecessary even. Now, sitting at that table, humiliated by my own family, clarity sliced through me. She had known something like this might happen. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down into my purse, fingers shaking slightly. The quiet rustle of paper felt loud in the tense silence as I pulled the neatly folded document out. Everyone watched. Me, curious yet wary. Alyssa's smirk faltered. My voice didn't tremble when I laid it on the table, looking directly at my father. You might want to read this before you celebrate too hard. He hesitated, glanced at Mom, whose eyes had widened slightly in silent understanding. He unfolded the document carefully, scanning quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, and finally, to a quiet fury, because in that will, Mom had left the house to me. The trust, the business shares, everything they'd tried so casually to strip away. T the bottom, a handwritten line, gentle yet powerful. Lena never asked for anything, so I leave her everything. They tried to erase me, humiliate me. But in that moment, at that beautiful, painful dinner, I understood something profound and unshakable. I was written in ink. When you're a child, everything is magnified. Every hurt feels immense. Every betrayal shapes the way your heart learns to trust or doesn't. Sitting at that dinner table, watching my father's face turn from smug pride to stunned disbelief, I realized that my childhood was not a collection of isolated incidents but a tapestry of quiet, calculated cruelties, each stitch woven deliberately to exclude, dismiss, diminish. Growing up, Alyssa had been the star of every family gathering, every birthday, every casual conversation. It was as if the spotlight naturally followed her, illuminating her effortless charm. I remained quietly in the shadows, watching, learning, becoming invisible. Sometimes I thought if I stayed silent enough, they'd forget to hurt me. Mom saw me, though. She always saw me. Her eyes often met mine across crowded rooms, offering gentle acknowledgement, but never quite daring enough to speak openly about it. She knew something was wrong, felt it in the subtle glances exchanged between my father and Alyssa, in the warmth they showered on each other but withheld from me. Yet, she never openly intervened. I used to wonder why. Was it fear, complacency, or was it something deeper, something more painful she couldn't speak aloud? One afternoon, I was 9 years old, playing quietly by myself in the garden. Alyssa was inside, being praised loudly for another award or accomplishment, always something that glittered and drew attention. Mom came outside quietly, sitting beside me on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she reached out gently, smoothing my hair. Lena, she finally whispered, you are my quiet strength, you know that? I looked up at her, confused by the sudden confession. Her voice was heavy, burdened by something I couldn't fully understand. You don't always need applause, she continued softly. You see things clearly. Keep that strength safe. One day, it'll matter. I nodded, uncertain of what she meant, but her words settled deep inside me, like seeds planted carefully for a distant season. Mom wasn't always brave, but she saw things plainly. She understood her role was limited, that openly challenging my father's favoritism would only fracture our family more painfully. Throughout childhood, I watched as Alyssa received everything without asking. Praise for mediocre achievements, forgiveness for her missteps, endless patience for her whims. I never resented her openly, I simply didn't know how to. My resentment lived quietly inside, where it bloomed unseen. I learned early that the only thing worse than being mistreated was openly complaining about it, and so, I built my life silently around this understanding. I would never beg. I would never ask for what should have been freely given: love, fairness, acknowledgement. Instead, I carefully crafted a world of quiet accomplishments. Good grades earned privately, friendships forged discreetly, a career built on quiet dedication rather than public applause. Yet, Those quiet successes only deepened the divide. The better I did, the quieter they became. My father's proud boasts at parties were always reserved for Alyssa. "She's going places," he'd say, slinging an arm around her shoulders, as though she had single-handedly won wars rather than merely existing comfortably in her privileged life. Meanwhile, my quiet victories were met with nods or silence, sometimes just a dismissive smile. They assumed my successes cost me nothing, unaware of the quiet battles fought daily within my own heart, the battle to feel worthy, visible, seen. As I grew older, the subtle punishments intensified. Small omissions from family plans, late invitations, forgotten birthdays remembered only at the last minute, gifts hastily chosen with little thought. Each slight cut deeper, reinforcing my isolation. Alyssa watched, eyes glittering knowingly, satisfied that the unspoken competition was firmly in her favor. Yet, even then, something stirred inside me, resilience, stubbornness perhaps. I told myself repeatedly, I didn't need their validation. Their neglect wouldn't define me. But the truth is, neglect seeps deeply into your bones, making you question your very worth. 6 months before Mom's stroke, she called me over quietly. She was frail already, her eyes softer, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. "Lena," she began, hesitating slightly, "I need you to understand something. Families don't always love perfectly or fairly. But you deserved better." Her words sliced through the careful illusion I'd constructed. I'd spent years silently accepting unfairness, believing I was invisible. Yet here she was, acknowledging openly what had always been unspoken. She handed me the envelope carefully, her hands shaking gently with emotion. "This," she whispered urgently, "is to protect you, Lena. Promise me you'll use it if you ever need to." I held her gaze, silently nodding. I didn't ask questions. Somehow I understood. That small envelope was her quiet rebellion, her way of finally protecting the daughter she'd quietly loved but failed openly. Now, sitting at the table amid stunned silence, watching Dad's hands tremble as he realized his mistake, Mom's quiet defiance finally made sense. She'd anticipated this betrayal, the open cruelty hidden beneath polite family rituals. My childhood was never perfect. It wasn't even fair. But in that moment, I understood something powerful, something deeply empowering. Mom's quiet strength had found its home inside me. Her whispered words beneath that oak tree, her urgent plea with the envelope she'd always known. She'd always cared, silently, deeply, in ways neither Alyssa nor my father ever understood. They had tried to erase me, but I had grown silently beneath their gaze. Quiet resilience, nurtured by subtle pain, now blossomed into strength. They had thought I was invisible, but I was always there, quietly waiting, written in ink. The thing about betrayal, it rarely comes from strangers. Betrayal thrives in intimacy, in the quiet spaces between trust and deception. The person most capable of hurting you deeply is usually standing right beside you, wearing the smile you once believed was genuine. My sister Alyssa wore that smile effortlessly. Growing up, I admired it, envied it even. She knew exactly how to charm our parents, how to hold a room captive, turning family dinners into her private stage. And for years, I quietly let her take it, fading into the background, believing my silence was strength, believing it made me immune to deeper hurts. But betrayal is patient. It waits quietly, preparing its moment. I'd seen the triumphant gleam in Alyssa's eyes at the dinner table, the way her smirk curled just slightly, enough for only me to see the quiet mockery. She'd known exactly what was coming, and she'd chosen to watch the humiliation unfold, savoring it quietly. After Dad's announcement and the stunned silence that followed my reveal of Mom's original will, Alyssa's composure cracked just slightly, a tremor beneath her practiced elegance. "Alyssa," Dad muttered sharply, eyes shifting accusingly toward her, questioning silently whether she'd known the other will existed. The silent exchange confirmed my suspicion. She'd orchestrated this with him, quietly manipulating the strings, never anticipating the disruption of their carefully planned humiliation. Her eyes darkened for a brief moment, meeting mine in silent challenge. Anger flickered beneath her carefully maintained expression. She hadn't expected me to fight back, hadn't anticipated that beneath my quiet patience was resilience far stronger than she'd calculated, and yet, despite the anger simmering beneath her skin, there was no remorse. Alyssa didn't understand remorse because her victories were never truly questioned. In her world, fairness wasn't necessary, winning was all that mattered. I remembered clearly the first time I'd sensed Alyssa viewed me as competition rather than family. I was 16, working quietly in my room, surrounded by textbooks. Alyssa appeared in the doorway, arms folded, expression unreadable. "You know you don't always have to try so hard, Lena," she'd said, voice smooth and calm, almost kind. I'd looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" She'd smiled gently, an indulgent look that masked cruelty with perfect poise. "You push yourself too much. Mom and Dad already know who they're proud of." She hadn't said it harshly, hadn't raised her voice, but her quiet cruelty echoed for years afterward. Alyssa didn't shout or scream. Her weapons were soft, subtle, wielded with grace. In college, Alyssa's competitive edge sharpened. She publicly congratulated me on my achievements while privately belittling them, dismissing them quietly with half smiles and polite nods, constantly reminding me in small, insidious ways that whatever I did, she would always overshadow me, and the hardest part was how convincingly she masked it. Family gatherings became her quiet performances, where my presence seemed little more than an inconvenience, easily brushed aside. She played the dutiful, loving sister in front of our parents, her gentle laughter ringing out effortlessly. But the moment we were alone, her eyes hardened again, coldly indifferent. Once, at a family holiday, Alyssa leaned close to me, whispering calmly, "You know they pity you, right? Poor quiet Lena, always overlooked, always trying so hard." I had quietly absorbed it, silently allowing her cruelty to settle inside me. I didn't fight back openly. Instead, I became stronger in ways she never saw. Her words were painful, yes, but they became the stones I quietly built myself upon. Alyssa never understood that her dismissals only fueled my quiet resilience, made me quietly determined to prove that I deserved more than their dismissive glances. Now, seated at the dinner table, with my father's hands shaking, my mother's quiet gaze holding steady, I saw clearly how Alyssa had plotted her quiet triumph. She had convinced our father I deserved nothing, had subtly manipulated him until he believed erasing me was a justified, even necessary act, but in her quiet satisfaction, Alyssa had underestimated me. My quietness had never been weakness. It had been a quiet gathering of strength, a careful preservation of dignity, slowly and steadily nurtured over years of quiet battles fought alone. She stared at me now, her carefully practiced expression cracking, her confidence wavering. Her triumph was fading. Betrayal relies on silence. She hadn't anticipated that Mom, in her quiet way, had chosen to break that silence. Alyssa had assumed the silence around me meant submission. She never understood the quiet rebellion Mom had planted within me. I met her eyes steadily, calmly, without anger or triumph. I had no desire to hurt her back, not because she didn't deserve it, but because her cruelty no longer defined me. She'd chosen her path, quietly reveling in my pain, confident I'd never dare disrupt the story she'd carefully written for me, but Alyssa's story had never been mine. I had quietly written another one, deeper and truer, forged from resilience and strength earned quietly through every subtle betrayal, every withheld kindness. She'd chosen competition. I chose dignity. She'd chosen cruelty. I chose quiet strength. She'd expected to erase me, but I was already inked to play permanently a story she couldn't rewrite. In every family, there are truths that remain hidden, tucked away like keepsakes in a forgotten drawer. They linger quietly beneath smiles and polite conversations, waiting for the right moment or perhaps never finding it at all to surface. My mother held such truths close, wrapped safely within her silence, afraid perhaps that speaking them aloud would fracture everything beyond repair. I didn't always understand her silence. As a child, I'd see her standing quietly by the window, eyes focused on something distant, something no one else could see. Her gaze seemed to stretch past the neatly trimmed hedges, beyond the road lined with trees far away, where our quiet, perfect life didn't reach. Those moments had puzzled me then, but looking back, they spoke volumes of quiet unrest, of something unsaid but deeply felt. Mom and I had a silent bond forged quietly in corners and shadows. I knew she saw me differently from how my father and Alyssa did. Her eyes followed me in quiet understanding, offering comfort she couldn't openly express. There were countless moments when a brief look, a gentle touch, or a softly whispered phrase held more truth than hours of conversation ever could. One late afternoon, long before her stroke, I found Mom sitting alone on the porch swing, her shoulders slumped slightly, her hands folded gently in her lap. Something in her quiet posture made me pause, compelled to join her in silence. "I wish things were different for you, Lena," she whispered suddenly, her voice barely audible, almost lost in the breeze. I looked at her, startled by the quiet urgency in her tone. "Different how?" She hesitated, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the garden, distant yet deeply present in the moment. "Fairer, kinder," the words slipped quietly into the silence between us, painful but necessary. For a moment, we sat together quietly, absorbing the heavy truth hidden in her gentle confession. "Why don't you ever say anything?" I asked softly, almost afraid of her answer. She turned slowly, meeting my gaze directly. Her eyes held sorrow, apology, regret. "Because saying something aloud means facing it, and sometimes silence feels safer, even if it isn't fair." I understood then, more deeply than I ever had, the quiet strength and fragility in my mother's heart. She wasn't weak, she was trapped, caught between loyalty, fear, and love. Her silence wasn't indifference, it was quiet desperation. An attempt to hold together something too fragile to withstand truth spoken too clearly. In her quiet way, she did try to warn me. It was subtle, nearly invisible, buried in gestures so small they seemed meaningless at first glance. A gentle squeeze of my hand beneath the table after Alyssa monopolized dinner conversations, a quiet nod of acknowledgement after Dad dismissed my accomplishments. Mom was quietly acknowledging the injustice without openly challenging it, perhaps the only resistance she felt safe to offer. I think she hoped her quiet support would be enough. Maybe she imagined one day it would become clear to them that my quiet resilience would eventually shine brightly enough to illuminate the shadows they preferred to ignore. But they were blind to anything beyond their carefully constructed narrative. 6 months before the stroke, her urgency shifted. She summoned me quietly into her room, a faint tremor in her hands. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, frail yet determined, holding an envelope carefully, almost reverently. "Take this, Lena," she said quietly, pressing it into my hands. Her voice was thick with emotion, her eyes glistening softly. "Please," I stared at it, unsure. "What is it?" Her eyes searched mine deeply, as if trying to convey everything she'd never dared speak aloud. "A safety net, a truth they can't erase." Her words sent a chill through me, yet they felt oddly comforting. She knew something was coming. She knew their subtle punishments would escalate into something tangible, something openly cruel. "Why now?" I asked, sensing urgency beneath her quiet calm. "Because I'm running out of time," she whispered, voice breaking softly. "And because you've been quiet too long." The moment haunted me long afterward, how she quietly handed me a weapon she couldn't wield herself, entrusting me with a truth she'd hidden carefully for years. I took the envelope and hid it away, unsure if I'd ever need it, but somehow knowing its importance would one day become painfully clear. When she suffered the stroke shortly afterward, unable to speak clearly anymore, our bond was reduced again to silent looks and gentle touches. But those small gestures spoke louder than ever. Her quiet eyes held messages of regret, of pride, of love so deep it ached. Now, at this dinner table, amid the shattered pieces of our family illusion, I felt Mom's quiet truths rising powerfully to the surface. She had known this day might come that my father and Alyssa might openly erase me from their narrative. She had seen clearly the cruelty hidden beneath quiet smiles, the injustice buried beneath polished manners. As I watched my father's expression darken, his eyes flickering between betrayal and anger, I felt Mom's quiet presence beside me. Her truths had finally surfaced, undeniable, quietly powerful in their revelation. She had quietly prepared me, knowing that someday I'd need more than silent strength. I'd need the truth written clearly, unerasably, and there, seated across from Alyssa and Dad, I finally understood Mom's silence fully. It had never been indifference. It was quiet rebellion, subtle defiance woven carefully into small gestures, gentle words, and finally, an envelope quietly entrusted to me, a document that spoke louder than her voice ever could. Mom's quiet strength had always been hidden beneath a veil of silence, but tonight, as I watched them confront the truths she'd left behind, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful truths are whispered quietly, waiting patiently until they can no longer be denied. They tried to silence us both, but Mom had quietly ensured that our truth was written clearly, powerfully, and permanently. They tried to erase me, but she had quietly, courageously, made sure I was inked forever. Sometimes a life-altering moment isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't burst through the door demanding attention. Instead, it slips in quietly, barely noticed, settling softly into the background. It waits patiently until one day you look back and realize that small moment changed everything. That's how it was when my mother gave me the envelope. At the time, it didn't feel momentous, just slightly odd, confusing in its urgency, yet so quiet that I nearly overlooked its significance. But now, sitting at this shattered dinner table, surrounded by the wreckage of years of quiet betrayals, that tiny moment became vividly, painfully clear. It had been a rainy afternoon, just 6 months before the stroke. The house was hushed, wrapped in a gloomy sort of peace, the rain tapping softly on the windows. Mom had called me into her study, a place she rarely used, a room that always felt solemn and off-limits, its quietness almost sacred. I entered quietly, hesitant at first. Mom sat behind her desk, something she rarely did. Her posture was straight, tense, as if holding herself together required careful concentration. "Come sit, Lena," she said softly, motioning gently to the chair across from her. Her eyes were dark with emotion, heavy with something she struggled silently to bear. "Is everything okay?" I asked quietly, feeling my heartbeat quicken in response to the urgency radiating from her. She hesitated, fingers tracing absent-mindedly across a small stack of papers. Finally, she lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes gentle but filled with quiet desperation. "I don't know how much time I have left," she began softly. Her voice quivered slightly, but her resolve strengthened quickly, steadying her words. "And I need you to have something important." Just in case, my throat tightened with confusion and a quiet fear. "Mom, what are you saying?" She reached carefully into the drawer beside her, producing a small, neatly folded envelope. It was unremarkable, plain, ordinary, but she handled it gently, as if it held great weight. "You've always been strong, Lena," she whispered softly, passing it carefully across the desk to me. "Even quietly, in your own way. But strength doesn't mean enduring every hurt silently." I took the envelope, its weight insignificant, yet the moment carried a profound heaviness. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely audible, fearful of breaking the quiet tension between us. "A truth," she said softly, her voice trembling gently, like something fragile balancing precariously on the edge. "And perhaps someday, a shield." She watched me closely, her expression raw and open in a way she rarely allowed. "Promise me you'll keep this safe. Don't open it yet. But if things ever feel off, if you ever feel completely alone, open it." I stared down at the envelope, confusion mixing quietly with anxiety. "Why won't you tell me what it is?" "Because sometimes truths need to be revealed quietly, in their own time," she murmured. "And because I don't want you burdened yet, Her voice carried such quiet conviction that I didn't question her further. I tucked the envelope carefully into my bag, a little baffled but deeply moved by her quiet trust. Days passed, weeks, even. Life resumed its quiet, familiar pattern. Yet the envelope lingered silently at the back of my mind, occasionally surfacing in moments of quiet introspection. Mom never mentioned it again, as though it had never happened, returning once more to her usual quiet composure. Then, the stroke came without warning. Mom was taken from us in fragments, her voice stolen, her body limited, leaving her trapped within her own silence. I sat beside her countless hours afterward, holding her hand quietly, trying desperately to read the messages her eyes still managed to convey, but something shifted in me during those quiet hospital days. I understood, now, more clearly, the depth of her quiet desperation during our brief exchange in the study, the urgency of that moment, the silent alliance she'd formed with me, trusting me to carry forward what she herself couldn't. Months later, when Dad publicly erased me at the dinner table, the envelope's purpose crystallized. Mom had seen this coming. She had quietly known my father's cruelty, Alyssa's competitiveness, the casual dismissal that defined my place in their world. The envelope wasn't merely paper, it was my mother's silent voice, finally breaking through the barriers she'd lived within. It was her quiet defiance, her whispered rebellion, her unspoken alliance forged carefully, invisibly, knowing I would someday need more than quiet resilience to survive. Now, at this disastrous dinner, amid stunned silence and shattered facades, I understood the enormity of her quiet act. Mom had chosen quiet protection over open confrontation, perhaps because she believed I'd never be heard openly. Instead, she'd entrusted me with something more powerful: quiet truth, undeniable proof, subtly powerful enough to shift everything. Dad glared at me across the table, his expression caught between anger and panic. Alyssa's carefully cultivated composure had faltered, her eyes now desperate, searching for control that had slipped away. But I felt strangely calm, secure in the quiet strength of the silent alliance Mom had gifted me. Mom's quiet defiance had taught me an invaluable truth. Not all battles needed noise to be won. Sometimes the strongest rebellions are carried quietly, secretly, nurtured silently until the moment they become undeniable. In the end, Mom hadn't been weak. She'd been quietly, desperately brave. She'd given me the envelope knowing someday I'd find courage in her quiet rebellion. They tried to erase me, but Mom had quietly, deliberately made sure I was inked permanently into a truth they could never deny. There are moments in life when the very air feels thick with tension, when the silence grows louder than any scream could ever be. This was one of those moments. Sitting there at the dining table, my mother's carefully hidden truths spread plainly before us. I watched as reality slowly reshaped itself, exposing every hidden crack, every fragile facade. My father's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. Alyssa's eyes darted between him and me, the color draining slowly from her carefully composed face. And Mom sat quietly, her eyes filled with a blend of sorrow and strength, witnessing the storm she had silently predicted. "Read it aloud, Dad," I said softly, calmly. My voice surprised me, not a tremor, not a hint of anger, just quiet resilience. Forged by years of silence and subtle betrayals, he cleared his throat roughly, hesitating. But there was nowhere left to hide. Quietly, reluctantly, he began reading, his voice strained, heavy with a disbelief he could barely mask. "I, Margaret Moore, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my home, my shares in the family business, and all assets of the trust, to my daughter Lena." The silence that followed was deafening. Each breath around the table felt labored, tight. Eyes flickered nervously, tension stretching taut between us. My aunt shifted uncomfortably, glancing sideways at Uncle Mark, whose expression had settled into quiet discomfort. Alyssa stared rigidly at her plate, fingers clenching and unclenching silently. My father lowered the document, eyes meeting mine fiercely. "This can't be real," he muttered softly, but his voice carried no conviction. The truth was undeniable, written clearly, quietly in ink. Mom's quiet rebellion had finally reached him, unraveling his carefully maintained authority. It stated clearly, 6 months before her stroke, I said quietly, calmly. I confirmed with her attorney. It's valid, legally binding, Lena. This is ridiculous, Alyssa finally snapped, desperation sharpening her tone. Mom wouldn't do this, she wouldn't betray us. Her use of us wasn't lost on me. She had always considered herself and Dad as the heart of our family, everyone else peripheral, expendable. Especially me. She didn't betray anyone, I answered calmly. She simply spoke a quiet truth, one she'd carried for years. I glanced at Mom, whose eyes shimmered softly with emotion. Unable to speak clearly since the stroke, she held my gaze firmly, silently affirming everything. She'd trusted me quietly, believing one day I would need this protection, understanding what they refused to acknowledge, that fairness mattered, that dignity mattered, and that I mattered. You must have manipulated her, Dad murmured harshly, eyes narrowed accusingly. Your mother would never deliberately create division. No, I replied quietly, sadness tinging my voice. You both did that yourselves years ago. Mom simply chose to acknowledge it. Alyssa laughed bitterly, her carefully polished facade slipping entirely, replaced by something raw, desperate. She pitied you, Lena. That's all this is. Her words sliced deep, but I didn't flinch. I'd endured Alyssa's quiet cruelty for so long, her insults had become familiar companions. But tonight, they held no power. Mom saw clearly, I replied calmly, voice steady. She knew exactly what she was doing. Alyssa's hands shook visibly now, her face reddened with anger and disbelief. But beneath her rage, I saw the quiet panic of someone whose world was collapsing, whose illusion of control had fractured irreparably. I don't want anything from you, I added softly, directing my words toward my father. I never did, but I won't be erased. I won't quietly accept humiliation any longer. He opened his mouth, as though readying some angry retort, but words seemed to fail him. His carefully built narrative had crumbled, exposed by Mom's quiet, powerful truth. He looked down again at the will, hands trembling visibly. A document he couldn't deny, truths he couldn't dismiss. In the silence that followed, Mom reached over, placing her hand gently, shakily onto mine. Her touch spoke clearly, silently, affirming everything she couldn't voice. I squeezed gently, feeling warmth rush through me, quiet reassurance reinforcing my resolve. We'd both lived silently within the confines of their narrative for too long, but no more. Around us, quiet whispers began, awkward murmurs of confusion and disbelief. I rose slowly, carefully folding the document, tucking it safely back into my purse. I won't fight you, I said quietly, clearly, addressing my father and Alyssa. But I won't let you erase me again. I stood, moving quietly toward the door. Behind me, silence lingered, heavy and thick with unspoken regrets, unacknowledged pain. But I no longer felt their weight. In its place was quiet empowerment, strength earned patiently over years of enduring subtle punishments, silent cruelty. I paused at the door, glancing back just once. Mom's eyes met mine again, a quiet smile flickering gently across her lips. Her silent strength had become mine, her quiet rebellion now fully realized. They believed I could be easily dismissed, quietly erased. But tonight, I'd shown clearly, quietly, that some truths can never be rewritten. I stepped into the night, my heart steady, my spirit calm. My mother's quiet, carefully hidden truths had finally spoken clearly, and I would carry their quiet strength forward, unafraid, permanently inked in resilience. In the days following that painful dinner, our family fractured quietly but irrevocably. Phone calls stopped coming, invitations faded into silence, replaced by awkward distance. It felt like being quietly erased again, but this time I welcomed it, no longer trapped by their quiet cruelty, but freed from the pretense that had defined our relationships for so long. Dad didn't call me. Alyssa sent only one brief, icy text. I hope you're happy. it read, as if I'd somehow betrayed them by refusing to quietly endure their humiliation. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say, nothing that hadn't already been quietly shouted into the tense air at dinner, the truth now fully exposed. Mom was the only one I continued to see regularly. Our visits became quiet rituals, carefully crafted moments of peace amid the storm. We rarely spoke openly about that night, yet in our silence, every glance and gentle touch carried weight, quietly reaffirming our bond. She seemed relieved, somehow lighter, despite her limited speech. It was as if finally exposing the hidden truths had released a burden she'd silently carried for decades. One afternoon, sitting quietly beside her wheelchair in the garden of the assisted living center, Mom gently squeezed my hand. Her eyes softened, glistening slightly with unshed tears. "Sorry," she whispered quietly, her voice fragile, breaking slightly beneath the weight of emotion. My heart twisted painfully, understanding exactly what she meant. "You don't need to apologize," I replied softly, my voice steady, gentle. "You did everything you could." She shook her head slightly, frustration shadowing her quiet gaze. Her words came slowly, painstakingly formed. "Should have spoken. Protected you sooner." I leaned close, gently resting my forehead against hers. "You did protect me, Mom. You gave me exactly what I needed, your quiet strength." She breathed softly, tears sliding gently down her cheeks, their warmth mingling quietly with mine. Our shared silence spoke clearly, louder than words ever could, acknowledging pain, forgiveness, gratitude. Away from her, however, life felt strangely unfamiliar. Old friends cautiously asked questions, their polite curiosity masking a deeper desire for gossip. Family drama became whispered conversations behind closed doors, avoided eyes, quietly uncomfortable silences. I kept my answers simple, guarded not out of shame, but because no one else could fully understand the complexity, the quiet agony of years spent silently enduring subtle betrayal. One evening, as I quietly sorted through boxes of family photographs in the house Mom had left me, my phone rang sharply, breaking the silence. Dad's name lit the screen. I hesitated, breath catching softly. Eventually, I answered. "Lena," he began curtly, his voice tight, strained. "We need to talk." I paused, gathering quiet courage. "I'm listening." His breath shuddered slightly, hesitation filling the empty space between us. "This family's falling apart. We can't let one misunderstanding ruin everything." I laughed softly, bitterly, a quiet, broken sound. "Misunderstanding? You deliberately excluded me from your will, Dad. You erased me from your life. How is that a misunderstanding?" "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly, voice thick with discomfort. "You know your sister." "Yes," I interrupted gently. "I do, and I know you too. That's why Mom had to quietly protect me, because neither of you ever would." The silence lingered painfully. Finally, he spoke quietly, his voice edged with helpless frustration. "Lena, you're tearing this family apart." The words cut deep, quietly, precisely aimed to wound. Yet, I felt strangely calm, clarity crystallizing sharply in that moment. "No, Dad," I whispered softly. "You did that years ago." "I'm just refusing to pretend anymore." The line went quiet again, tension hanging heavily. Finally, he sighed softly, resigned. "What do you want?" I closed my eyes briefly, pain twisting quietly in my chest, yet resolve steadying my voice. "I don't want anything from you. I just want peace." "I deserve peace." He hesitated again, voice lowered, pride wavering. "Lena," but he couldn't finish, the quietness swallowing whatever fragile apology he attempted. Eventually, he simply ended the call, quietly retreating again behind familiar silence. Afterward, I sat quietly amid scattered photographs, each one a silent testament to a past that no longer fit. The smiling faces, posed carefully for holiday gatherings, felt suddenly empty images carefully constructed to hide quiet truths, subtle wounds, silent cruelty. Mom's gentle face looked up at me from one picture, her eyes quietly thoughtful, patient yet burdened. Alyssa stood beside her, carefully poised, smiling beautifully for the camera, effortlessly dominating the scene. I stood slightly apart, smiling quietly, eyes shadowed, already distant. Carefully, deliberately, I gathered the photographs, placing them back in the box. My past couldn't be erased, nor could the quiet fractures of my family be fully repaired. But maybe healing didn't mean mending every break. Perhaps it simply meant finding peace within the fractures, quiet strength and scars earned honestly. Mom had taught me quietly, through every unspoken truth, every subtle act of defiance, that dignity could never be taken, it had to be surrendered. And I would never again quietly surrender. They had tried to erase me, but I stood quietly, resiliently whole. My family had fractured quietly, painfully, but within those quiet fractures, I had finally found myself. I had become erasable, written firmly, permanently, quietly in ink. It's a strange feeling, finding strength in the ruins of what you once knew. Sometimes clarity emerges quietly, unexpectedly, like sunlight piercing through storm clouds after a lifetime of gray skies. In the days after the family fell apart, I found a kind of peace I'd never known before. Quietly, carefully, I began to rebuild my life, one gentle moment at a time. The house Mom left me felt strangely empty at first, filled with memories that whispered in every corner, each room quietly echoing with stories of laughter, pain, and unspoken truths. But slowly, I reshaped those echoes, allowing the space to become mine fully, free of the shadows my family had quietly cast over me. I visited Mom often, her quiet presence a grounding force amid the lingering tension. Each meeting felt deeply comforting, our bond stronger now that truth had quietly cleared away the haze. Words were still limited, her speech slow and deliberate, but in the silence between sentences, our connection grew deeper, richer, quietly meaningful. "You happy?" she asked softly one afternoon, eyes searching my face gently. I paused thoughtfully, smiling quietly at the simple question. "I'm getting there," she nodded slowly, her eyes warm, understanding. "Good," she murmured quietly, gently squeezing my hand, her approval wrapped in quiet pride. Outside the care home, however, Alyssa lingered persistently, quietly inserting herself wherever she could. Her phone calls came at odd hours, her voice carefully measured, always just shy of an apology, always masking deeper intentions. "Lena, we're family," she whispered urgently during one of those calls. Desperation threaded quietly into her words. "You're hurting everyone by isolating yourself." "No," I replied softly, calmly. "I'm finally healing," she sighed, frustration simmering quietly beneath her carefully controlled voice. "Healing doesn't mean you abandon family." My heart tightened quietly. "Alyssa, you abandoned me first. You built a family that excluded me, and you expected me to quietly accept it forever." Silence stretched between us, painful yet necessary. Finally, her voice returned, barely audible. "I never meant, but you did," I interrupted, gently, firmly. "You meant every quiet dismissal, every subtle cruelty." "I'm done quietly accepting your version of love." The line grew silent again, Alyssa's breathing steady, careful. "I wish you'd just move past this." "I am moving past it," I replied softly. "That's exactly why I can't let you back in." "Not now, maybe not ever." She didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, bitterness edged her quiet words. "You've changed, Lena." "Yes," I whispered clearly, calmly. "I finally have." Afterward, quiet clarity settled deeply within me. Alyssa's carefully crafted manipulations no longer reached me. Her quiet venom, once painfully effective, now slipped harmlessly past me, powerless. Unexpectedly, the space left by family allowed room for quiet strength to flourish. I rediscovered small joys, long walks taken alone, quiet mornings sipping coffee on the porch, reading books I'd set aside for years. Friends reached out cautiously, uncertain but supportive, quietly reminding me that family wasn't always bound by blood. One evening, a friend came over, bringing laughter and warmth into my home again. As we sat quietly together on the porch, beneath a twilight sky streaked softly with lavender and gold, she turned gently toward me. "Do you miss them?" She asked quietly, tentatively. I considered her question carefully, heart quietly weighing truths I'd finally faced fully. Sometimes I admitted softly, honestly, but I don't miss who I was when I was with them. She nodded gently, understanding without needing more explanation. Quietly, we watched stars emerge one by one, tiny points of light breaking through darkness, silently beautiful. It felt symbolic, powerful, the quiet empowerment of simply existing, healing, and becoming whole again. In those quiet, solitary moments, I understood clearly that empowerment wasn't about loud victories or public confrontations. True empowerment came quietly, gently, nurtured through tiny choices, small defiant acts of dignity, quiet moments when you refused to surrender your worth. Mom's strength, given quietly, had become my own. Her quiet rebellion had taught me resilience, showed me that dignity was never about validation from others, it was about silently claiming it for yourself. Day after day, moment after moment, weeks turned quietly into months, each passing day, affirming my newfound clarity. My father's attempts to reconnect became sporadic, fading slowly into quiet resignation. Alyssa eventually retreated, understanding finally that her power over me was lost, quietly dissipating like mist beneath the morning sun. I stood quietly, firmly rooted in this new life. Mom had given me the strength to rewrite my story quietly, defiantly, with resilience and quiet confidence. I learned not to fear the quiet solitude. It wasn't emptiness, but room to finally breathe. One afternoon, sitting quietly beside Mom again, I gently took her hand, smiling softly into her eyes. I think I finally understand what you meant all those years ago, I whispered quietly. She squeezed my fingers gently, eyes shining with quiet pride, love, unspoken gratitude. You were always strong, she said softly, carefully, her voice fragile yet clear. I just reminded you. I felt warmth flood my heart, tears quietly spilling over, washing away years of quiet hurt. Mom had quietly, lovingly taught me that strength wasn't about never breaking, it was about quietly, consistently rebuilding yourself, piece by piece. They'd tried to erase me, but instead, I'd quietly, powerfully reclaimed myself. Empowerment had found me quietly, unexpectedly, gently leading me toward a future no one else could define. I was finally, quietly, undeniably, written in ink. Life sometimes hands you a moment where you realize you're no longer fighting to be seen, heard, or understood. Instead, you're simply living quietly, authentically, unburdened by the expectations or rejections of those who once defined you. Months pass quietly, gently smoothing the sharp edges of betrayal, replacing bitter memories with moments of quiet peace. Mom remained my anchor, her presence steady and reassuring, her eyes quietly affirming each small step I took toward reclaiming my life. I hadn't seen Alyssa or my father since that dinner. Occasionally, their absence stung, a quiet ache in my heart, but each day without them reminded me of something profound. I had always survived without their validation. Now, finally, I was thriving, yet, life has a way of testing us again just when we begin to feel truly strong. One afternoon, Alyssa appeared unexpectedly at my doorstep. Her appearance was perfectly put together, yet beneath her polished exterior, something had shifted. Her eyes were softer, quieter, touched with genuine uncertainty. "Lena," she began hesitantly, her voice careful yet strangely vulnerable. "Can we talk?" I paused, quietly considering. Eventually, I stepped aside, allowing her entrance. We sat quietly in the living room, the air thick with tension, yet, for once, Alyssa seemed genuinely uncomfortable, uncertain, stripped of her familiar power. "I've missed you," she finally admitted softly, words laced with quiet regret. I held her gaze steadily, feeling the gentle power in my own quiet calm. "I've missed having a sister too," I replied gently. "But we weren't ever really sisters, were we?" She looked away, eyes clouded quietly with shame. "I didn't understand. I thought you thought I'd quietly accept whatever you and Dad decided was my place," I interrupted softly. "But Mom showed me something different." her eyes lifted, quietly searching my face. I don't expect forgiveness. I need you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I watched her carefully. Alyssa rarely apologized, and never without hidden intent. Yet this felt quietly real, raw, unguarded. I appreciate that, I finally said softly. But apology alone can't undo everything. She nodded gently, understanding. I know. I'm not expecting us to fix everything. I needed you to hear it. We sat quietly, the silence between us not quite comfortable, yet not hostile either. Something subtle had shifted, a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps our wounds were too deep to fully mend, yet healing could begin, quietly, cautiously. Eventually, she stood, moving quietly toward the door. Turning briefly, she hesitated again. Dad misses you, even though he won't admit it. He's just too proud. I smiled softly, sadness quietly coloring my words. I've learned to live without him, Alyssa. Without both of you. It's not about pride, it's about peace. She nodded, quietly accepting this truth. She left gently, closing the door behind her, the quiet click sounding faintly symbolic closure, perhaps, to years of silent rivalry, quiet competition, subtle pain. That evening, I visited Mom again, quietly, recounting Alyssa's unexpected apology. Her eyes held quiet approval, pride mingling gently with relief. Forgiveness for yourself, she whispered quietly, carefully forming each word. That's enough. I squeezed her hand softly, understanding her wisdom fully. Forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about releasing myself quietly from the burden of anger, resentment, expectations never met. It was quietly choosing peace over pain. Weeks slipped by quietly. The visits with Mom remained gentle touchstones of strength. Life moved quietly forward, moments of joy quietly unfolding in ordinary things, like tending the garden Mom loved, reading peacefully beneath the trees, evenings filled quietly with friends who truly knew me. Then, one day, a letter arrived. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, each line carefully written, the quiet restraint palpable. Lena, it began quietly. I've always struggled to express myself. I realize now how deeply I failed you, how much pain I caused. I don't expect forgiveness, but please know this. I was wrong, and I regret it deeply. I read it slowly, quietly absorbing each painful acknowledgement. Tears slid gently down my cheeks, not from sadness, but relief. Quiet triumph surged within me, a sense of dignity finally affirmed. Later, sitting quietly beside Mom, I gently shared the letter. Her eyes glistened softly, her quiet smile full of pride, relief, unspoken gratitude. She squeezed my hand, silently affirming my quiet victory. You always knew, didn't you? I whispered softly. She nodded gently, eyes filled with quiet love, unspoken truths now fully acknowledged. Always believed in you. I leaned close, resting my head gently against hers, quiet tears flowing freely, washing away the final shadows. We sat in silence, a quiet triumph shared between us, built upon strength, resilience, quiet courage. My family had fractured, yes. Pain had shaped much of my story, but now, quietly triumphant, I stood free of their definitions, quietly empowered by my own truth, finally, beautifully whole. They had tried to erase me, but they hadn't understood strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, the deepest triumphs come quietly, softly, undeniably, written gently, yet permanently, in ink. There's something quietly sacred about reclaiming yourself after a lifetime spent quietly living by others' definitions. Something powerful about knowing, finally and completely, who you truly are, who you've quietly always been, beneath layers of silent hurt, unspoken dreams, and subtle strength. Months passed gently, each day quietly confirming my peace. Mom remained my anchor, her presence quietly steadying me, her eyes speaking silent volumes of love and quiet pride. Our visits were tender rituals, small, quiet exchanges carrying a lifetime of meaning. She remained frail, words scarce, yet every moment we shared was rich, quietly sacred. The house she left me became fully mine, no longer haunted by shadows of old pain. I quietly filled it with live flowers on the windowsills, paintings carefully chosen warmth where cold memories once lingered. I tended her garden, each bloom feeling like a quiet nod of approval from her, small affirmations of life growing gently, defiantly, from the earth. One quiet evening, sitting peacefully on the porch, I watched the sunset spill softly across the horizon, amber, rose, gentle shades of lavender blending quietly into dusk. A car pulled into the driveway. Alyssa stepped out, cautious but calm, eyes gentler than I'd ever seen them. Dad stepped out behind her, quietly uncertain. I waited calmly, my heart steady, no longer anxious or fearful. They approached quietly, almost hesitantly, and we stood together in gentle silence, words quietly waiting their turn. Dad spoke first, voice low, humble. "Lena, I won't ask forgiveness. I know what I did and what it cost us. But I'm sorry. Truly sorry." I studied him quietly, seeing clearly the quiet pain etched deeply in his face. Gently, I nodded, acknowledging his apology without surrendering. My quiet peace. Alyssa stepped forward gently, her eyes soft, no longer calculating. "We're not asking anything from you. We wanted you to know we see you clearly now. You deserved better." I breathed softly, a quiet sense of release washing over me. "Thank you," I replied gently, simply. I didn't need more, not apologies, not validation, not reconciliation forced by guilt or obligation, but their quiet acknowledgement felt healing, affirming. "We'll leave you alone," Dad added quietly, sincerity coloring each word. "But we needed to say this. It matters." I met his gaze softly, a quiet compassion emerging, acknowledging his humanity, his flaws, his regrets. "I appreciate it," I whispered, meaning it fully. "And I wish you both peace." Quietly, they turned away, leaving gently into the fading twilight. Watching their departure didn't feel painful, just quietly significant. Closure didn't mean rebuilding every broken relationship. Sometimes it simply meant quietly acknowledging the end, letting go gently, peacefully. I drove slowly to see Mom afterward, heart quietly reflecting. Sitting beside her again, her fragile hand gently clasped in mine, I shared their visit. She smiled quietly, eyes deep with gentle understanding. "You, stronger now," she whispered gently, clearly, pride glowing quietly in her eyes. "Because of you," I replied softly, voice thick with emotion. "You gave me strength." She shook her head gently, lovingly. "Always yours." Just reminded. "You," I smiled softly, tears gently spilling. Her quiet wisdom always carried profound truths. I'd carried quiet strength within me, even when I couldn't yet recognize it. We sat quietly, peace enveloping us both, silence warmly wrapping around us like an embrace. I'd spent years quietly believing their lies, that I was small, invisible, erasable. But Mom had known differently. She had quietly seen clearly who I was beneath their dismissals, quietly understood the resilience within me, quietly trusted I would someday reclaim myself fully. Weeks slipped by, gently turning into months. Mom's health continued to decline quietly, gently, until one afternoon I received the call I'd quietly anticipated yet feared. She had passed gently, peacefully, leaving quietly, her spirit finally free from the body that had limited her. Voice, standing quietly by her grave beneath a gentle sky, I felt her presence deeply, profoundly. Her quiet strength, the gentle resilience she'd nurtured within me, felt vivid, alive, written permanently in my heart. I placed flowers quietly upon the fresh earth, flowers from her garden, a quiet tribute to the woman who'd silently guided me toward myself. I spoke softly into the gentle breeze. Words meant only for her. "I'll live fully, Mom," I whispered gently. "You taught me how." I returned quietly home, the house now deeply peaceful, Mom's memory wrapped gently around every corner, her presence written softly yet permanently within me. My family story had been complicated, marked by quiet pain, betrayal, subtle cruelties. Yet, within the quiet fractures, I'd found something powerful myself, clearly, gently, triumphantly whole. They tried to erase me, but their efforts had quietly shaped my strength, my resilience, my quiet defiance. Mom had known all along, had quietly ensured that when their cruelty became undeniable, I'd have the strength to reclaim myself fully. I understood now, clearly, profoundly, that my story was mine alone. They'd once held power, quietly defining my worth, but no more. Now, my truth spoke quietly, powerfully, undeniably, words written gently yet permanently, inked deeply into the story of my life. They believed I was erasable, but instead, I'd quietly emerged stronger, clearer, written forever in resilience, courage, quiet triumph. I was never invisible. I was never weak. I was always quietly, powerfully, undeniably myself, fully, permanently, beautifully written in ink.